Good morning, and welcome to Redeemer Lutheran Church. I'm Pastor Gary Lodeholt. Psalm 27, verse 14 says, "Wait for the Lord, be strong, and let your heart take courage. Wait for the Lord." As children, it seemed like all we did was wait as the days drew closer and closer to Christmas. It seemed like Christmas would never come. Even now, as adults, we still don't wait very well, especially when it comes to God. We tend to want things in our time, not God's time. We tend to want things our way, not God's way. The thing is, the Bible is full of verses urging us to wait for God. This week and next week, as we count down the days to Christmas, we are going to look at Bible stories of people who waited for God in one way or another. This week, we're going to focus on people who didn't wait for God or God's time and rushed right ahead with their own ideas and trying to have things their way. Next week, the week of Christmas, we're going to consider some in the Bible who sometimes prayed urgently for God to act, and others who were surprised by what God did. But through it all, they waited patiently for God to act in God's time. Today, we will look at a story that may be the paradigm for not waiting for God to act, and the struggles that came and continue to come from it. Our story today is the one about Abraham and Hagar. In some ways, I can't blame Abraham and his wife Sarah. After all, God had promised them that they would have a child, and not just a child, but a son. In those days, sons were essential to provide care for you in your old age, but even more importantly, what they thought in those days was that you lived on through your descendants. In their memory, in the legacy you left them, that was your only existence after death. Sons were essential for preserving that legacy and passing down your name. The problem was that Abraham and Sarah had no children. You see, when God made that promise to Abraham, Abraham and Sarah were already old. In fact, Abraham was 75 years old, and Sarah was a spry young 65. The Bible goes to great pains to express that Sarah was well past her childbearing years. For Sarah to conceive and bear a son would certainly take a miracle at that point. So they waited for God to act. And they waited, and they waited years, and nothing happened. Finally, it was Sarah who decided that perhaps God meant that they should take matters into their own hands to, shall I say, help things along. So Sarah suggested that her maidservant, a woman named Hagar, should go into Abraham in Sarah's place. Perhaps Hagar will conceive, she thought, and she will bear a child for us that will be ours to give us a future. Perhaps this is the way God meant for us to make this happen. There is another hidden question there too, a darker, deeper concern. Perhaps this thing is too hard for God to do. Perhaps God had made a promise God couldn't keep because of Sarah's advanced age. So they put Sarah's plan into action. Abraham and Hagar slept together, and soon enough, Hagar turned up pregnant. And that was okay for a while. Eventually, Hagar started thinking that because she could bear a child while Sarah couldn't, she was the better woman. She had fulfilled her purpose in life to bear children, while Sarah had not. Well, for a servant to act in this uppity, haughty way wouldn't do, and eventually Sarah prevailed upon Abraham to drive Hagar and her son away from them. That's when we discover the astounding grace of God. You see, out in the wilderness, Hagar stashed the baby under a bush and then began to languish in the hot sun herself. That's when God came also to Hagar and promised Hagar that he would make a great nation of her son too. It was clear Abraham and Sarah would have their own child, and that child would be heir of God's full promise. But God had a promise for this lowly servant, outcast woman, and her son too. One point we take from this is that God doesn't forsake the lowly outcasts among us either. And we are called to offer love and care as well. Hagar went back, and she and her son were welcomed back into Abraham's household. And God's promise to her son also came true. His name was Ishmael, and he grew up to be the father of the Arabic peoples. But the conflict between Sarah and Hagar has lived out between the descendants of Isaac and Ishmael ever since, even until today. That's the kind of thing that happens when we take matters into our own hands. Psalm 130, verse 5 says, I wait for the Lord, my soul waits, and in his word I hope. Let's hope in God as we wait. Thanks for watching, and remember to let this day belong to God.